Shonen Jump is no stranger to romance manga, with it having many well-known rom-coms under its belt, and currently is serializing works like Blue Box and Himeten within the magazine. One of the most interesting celebrations of love and romance from Jump is a bit atypical though, ditching the school settings we're familiar with to delve deep into forensics and criminal psychology. Today we tackle Shonen Jump's most unhinged romance manga. Full name, ITLC, which is a play on words for the phrase aishiteru, which means I love you. Start date, February 1st, 2021. End date, June 28th, 2021. Total chapters, 21, compiled into 4 volumes with 2 extra chapters. Kazusa Inaoka would pop up first in 2013 for their one-shot Suki ga x2 bracket y minus 3 square root of x2 bracket 2 desu ne. I believe this equation makes a heart when solved. It seems to be a romance story hinging on the idea of a formula or equation for love, maybe playing on the idea of love being an equation that needs to be solved. Then in 2016, they would publish Bokura no Yu, or Our Hot Spring, in Jump Giga's first volume of that year. 2017's 4th issue of Jump Giga would then see the one-shot Hoshi no Oka debut about a boy who goes to live alongside 2 twin sisters who are perfect and lovable at school, but their personalities get worse when they're home. Then Inaoka would get a serialization in Jump Giga with Invade You in issue 1 of 2018, lasting for 3 issues and 9 chapters, and then beginning again as a new series in Weekly Shonen Jump's 25th issue of 2018. This would run for 31 chapters and is a romantic comedy about an alien who hides amongst humanity but gets involved with a pesky schoolgirl who finds out his true form. Inaoka wouldn't stop releasing manga, with Love Koi or Koi Koi coming out in Jump Giga's 2nd winter issue of 2019. Another romantic comedy, but by the sounds of it, it looks as if it toys with the meta elements of what a romantic comedy might be. Not long later, we would see Shinobi Shinobazu debut in Jump Plus in May, which ditched the romantic elements and was just a pure comedy story about a fan of ninja who sits next to a real ninja at school. We'd see something quite interesting next, with Inaoka serializing a short-term serial within Shonen Jump for 7 chapters long, but only digitally. A few series like this exist, and they weren't ever in the printed version of the magazine, but acted as a sort of ghost series for Shonen Jump. This series would be Bun Kiten, which has a full English fan translation and is about a boy called Shion who ends up getting retrograde amnesia one day. Waking up, his idol best friend tells him that over the period of time he forgot about, they began dating, but his stepsister also tells him the same thing. Bun Kiten is a romance drama series with more of a mystery plot as Shion tries to figure out which one of the two he is actually in love with. From the one-shots and prior series by Inaoka, romance is ubiquitous, as are ideas toying with different relationships and the very concept of love. This would all come to a head in Shonen Jump issue 9 of 2021 with the beginning of ITLC. Our story starts with the murder of an entertainer, Haruka Shinomiya, with shown an associate of theirs named Tagame, as well as the fact that they're being stalked by someone, just like how Shinomiya was stalked just before her death. Warinata was the 2 detective brothers, Sakon and Ukon Fukatsuki, are here on the case, interviewing Tagame and vowing they'll catch the perp in no time. A 3rd detective then comes up for a follow-up investigation at Tagame's house. She's a lady with glasses and a black ponytail who seems a bit off. She runs through the case, and as they're discussing, Tagame pours more coffee for this detective and gets a sudden phone call from Sakon, who wants to do a follow-up investigation. But then who is this detective that's in his very house? It's then revealed that this is no mere detective, and not just a stalker, but both. Risa Ayoi is a detective with unorthodox methods. She falls in love with criminals she's supposed to arrest, using stalking behavior and means of questionable legality to hunt them down relentlessly. While you aren't really given the clues of a traditional whodunit, what ITLC does with this first chapter is great, subverting your expectations of who the criminal is, while also introducing its true protagonist, who is characterized very distinctly. We learn here that Ai is a victim of kidnapping, which has caused her bizarre behavior to manifest, sprinkling seeds for future developments, and it also opens up ITLC's core themes about love and empathy, specifically in its evaluation of criminals. The core appeal of all this, though, is Risa Ai, her mannerisms, how she stalks her love interests or blights in shining armor, and the art depicting her as either radiantly cute or absolutely terrifying. Now onto our next major case, the Lolita serial murders, a chain of murders where young girls were found killed after being forced into Lolita-style clothing. Here we see Ai purposely get kidnapped, and her overbearing love and stalking behavior is so much that the criminal can't handle it. It's both funny, creepy, and quite gripping because there's real danger involved, but ITLC always treats Ai with earnestness despite the comedy it presents in these situations, especially after the fact that we find out that usually nobody ever comes to provide her backup, as the rest of the police force either sees her as another criminal or a tool to be used to catch criminals. This idea is explored through the next arc, Ohiro Mana, which starts out as a more slice-of-life adventure. We get some downtime with the characters and get to see Ai's obsession with visiting locations from a murder mystery drama she likes, which helps humanize her a lot and I find very relatable. At the manor, the group meet a mystery novelist named Ataru Kagami, who is there to get influence for a future novel of his and tells them of the manor's grisly past, with there having been multiple dead bodies found nearby. As they chat and get acquainted, they hear a scream and find the owner of the manor dead, with a creepy looking person hacksaw in hand. Conflict rises, but of course Ai falls in love and attempts to understand the murderer, and appears to be getting through to them after a bit of a chase around the mansion. She finds the truth about this murderer, Nobuto the killer, who had abnormal tendencies growing up, killing animals and even his own mother, as well as several others, in an attempt to hold their hands. It manifested after a period of abandonment, with Nobuo likely mentally unstable, not fully aware of what he was doing, causing his father to lock him up deep within the mansion and explaining the nearby murders. Ai sees this want to be loved and reaches out to Nobuo, sparking something within him, causing him to stop and say thank you. All of this would make for a boring story though, so the novelist Hikaru Kagamino, under the alias Ataru Kagami, shoots Nobuhiro. This is our introduction to the main villain, an unhinged, unfeeling psychopath who only views others as puppets to act as inspiration for his stories. This is also the person who kidnapped Ai, or the mastermind behind it, and the only person in the entire series who gets a negative reaction from Ai. I cannot stress how impactful this moment is for me. Ai in the entire series from its beginning to end only ever makes an expression like this towards Kagamino. Otherwise, she's frequently very loving to some pretty heinous criminals, so whatever this guy did must be something appalling. The fact that we never even get to know what it was as well makes it all the more dread-inducing. Couple this with a disregard for human life and a complete lack of feeling both emotionally and physically, and Kagamino embodies the concept of apathy perfectly, which contrasts with Ai really well as a source of infinite love almost. Sadly, this is the only arc he's present in due to ITLC's cancellation, but he brings a lot to the table thematically, which I'll dig into a bit more later. He does get captured here though, and we learn a little bit more about Ai's case, which seemed to involve a second Hikaru Kagamino who she does in fact love, but this one did something to him which likely earned her scorn. The group escort Kagamino away, with him rambling the entire time about his story in a very meta way, managing to break free from Sakon's grasp at one point and aims his gun at him. It's some really sloppy police work indeed, which Ukon ends up paying the price for, and in a surprising turn of events, this wound is fatal, leading to Ukon's death, with him dying instead of his brother. But before Kagamino wipes out the rest of the cast, the criminal, Nobuhiro from earlier, comes to the rescue, tackling him away. For once, he wants to do a good deed and takes out Kagamino by falling off a cliff with him. Kagamino's corpse is never found though, meaning he's still at large. After this, ITLC introduces a police chief character who is a bit over the top and reminds me of Kyan Cross, the principal from Vampire Knight, who is also really overbearing. Due to the actions of Aioi as well as the death of Ukon, the police's faith in him as the chief is being questioned, which leads him to step out of the limelight and form a new side division of detectives, the I Division, which consists of him, Aioi, and Sakon. Their first case as part of this is a hostage situation involving a bank robbery, which they solve by sneaking in as hostages and defusing the situation from the inside. There's also a focus here on not only saving others and arresting the criminal, but also appealing to their human nature and having their emotions be seen, actually arresting the perp but also incorporating Ayoi's loving approach. We then get a classic Phantom Thief style arc, which sees the gang try to deal with an art thief called Ma, who steals famous paintings, like the Mona Lisa, defaces them, and then returns them. It doesn't take long for them to find the Phantom Thief, who has been observing them this entire time, and their preconceptions of her being a man are wrong because she is in fact a lady, which Aioi instantly pounces on, declaring her love because in her eyes, gender doesn't matter at all. I think this is really cool and it's fun to see in something so mainstream like Jump, and Aioi really doesn't treat her any differently to all the male criminals we've come across so far. We then get a chase sequence, and following that, a Protect the Museum style segment where the police try to entrap Ma after her declaration to steal a new painting. Of course, they fail spectacularly, with Ma outwitting them, leading to her escape. She does get caught briefly by Sakon on her way to the roof, but manages to get away, fleeing by a pre-arranged helicopter flight. Unfortunately, the pilot isn't who she expected it to be, and is instead Aioi. The two end up landing on an island, and Aioi exposes Ma's past, with her being the granddaughter of a famous painter named Garo Kaizuka, with her name being Mamie Kaizuka. This backstory explores ideas of familial love as well as the want to be loved. Ma, or Mamie, is committing these acts of vandalism and theft to prove the love of her father was real. You see, her father followed in his father's footsteps, Garo the painter's, but never earned his approval. He was unloved by his own father, not really amounting to much, with his paintings never getting as popular as his father's. Before being able to prove his worth, his father dies, sending him into a spiral of depression, which culminates in him defacing every painting he's ever made and taking his own life. Mamie, now left alone, doesn't even have her father's paintings to remind her of his love of her, but one painting remains unaccounted for, her father's magnum opus, a portrait of herself. So she conjured her Ma persona to try to look for this painting, using her own face as a mugshot to spread around the world, so with the help of her fans, others might be able to find the painting for her. Arresting her would be easy, but Aioi doesn't just want to do that, and so she's found the painting with her insane stalker behavior and deduction abilities. Here it finally clicked with me that ITLC is less about solving these mysteries and arresting culprits, and more about understanding them. It's not even a why done it, we aren't strictly looking for why these criminals commit crimes, but a solution or a path to some kind of understanding and peace for these criminals. Aioi, through empathy and love, is trying to tackle the root cause of why these people commit crimes, and in this case it's a physical object she can obtain, as well as the representation of a love a father has for his daughter. The final arc, which consists of just 2 chapters, then involves a boy named Aichi Endo who has a bomb strapped to himself and requests for someone with a first name starting with A to mediate for him. This makes our protagonist, Aioi, perfect for the case. Along with Sakon, the two question Aichi's motives, asking him all sorts of questions, but he remains cryptic and talks in a very bizarre way, only letting on that he is somehow giving them hints on what the password to disarm the bomb is. It's only at the last second that Aioi manages to figure out what the single letter password is, which gives us the answer to a great puzzle that you could work out yourself if you're savvy enough and familiar enough with the Japanese language. To explain this, I have to first praise the localization of ITLC by David Evelyn. Aichi Endo's speech in these chapters correlates to the Japanese katakana alphabet. Each sentence starts with the next letter in sequence, going a, I, u, e, o, etc., which means David had to come up with extremely specific lines to fit the entire chapter to make the puzzle work, and it's honestly a really impressive feat. Other elements of great localization in ITLC include a lot of really good wordplay like the phrase blight in shining armor, or my favorite, interrogate instead of interrogate, which David was very vocal about sharing their process of making while the manga was first coming out. I'll link a thread from David about this section in particular in the description, as it's really interesting, and I encourage you to follow them as they provide a lot of fun insight into the manga translation industry. This chapter in particular is a great showcase of why good localization matters and why we should really value the hardworking and passionate people who translate our manga for us. As for why Aichi did this, he began realizing that those around him didn't really care all that much about him. They would distort his self-image, resulting in a crisis of identity. This included friends, people in positions of power like police, and even his own mother. Due to this, I think he wanted to go out on his own terms, so being understood by nobody, he decided to create a problem nobody could solve. But he did have a solution in mind, just in case someone in the world could understand him. This part of the story might seem a bit of an odd way to end ITLC. The crime isn't a big murder, it's something very isolated and personal, but it's all about understanding the individual. I think a lot of people are going to read and look at ITLC and critique it heavily for its unorthodox protagonist. They might call Aioi silly or put forward the idea that this series overall is too wacky to work as a mystery series. There might also be critique of its mysteries from a structural point of view. When you're presented with a mystery work, often you expect there to be clues so you can solve it yourself. In a majority of cases, this is a great appeal of the genre. ITLC, though, true to its name, does a lot of telling, or rather explaining, of its cases instead of providing you clues to solve things yourself, bar its final small arc. In a lot of cases, the over-the-top schemes you might get in a mystery novel committed by the perpetrator are actually committed by Aioi. You just get to see them unfold in a mystery-like manner, which is fun but might disappoint some people. If it's just this gimmick, then it's all well and good. It's kind of interesting and novel, but not enough to keep the series afloat on its own. In my reread though, I got a lot of thematic depth out of all of this as well. Risa Ayoi's approach to crime and criminals is an odd one, as stated numerous times throughout this video. She loves them. It's her modus operandi. She approaches each criminal in the series with love, trying to understand them. She wants to validate their emotions and acknowledge the why behind everything. Criminals will usually always have a motive for their actions. This is especially true in mystery fiction, and while reading ITLC, it made me remember a scene from Agatha Christie's second Poirot novel, Murder on the Links. In this scene, the famous detective Hercule Poirot and his friend/assistant Hastings have a conversation about the motives behind murder. Money is not the only motive for murder, I objected. True, agreed Poirot placidly. There are two others. The crime passionnel is one, and there is the third rare motive. Murder for an idea, which implies some form of mental derangement on the part of the murderer. Homicidal mania and religious fanaticism belong to that class. We can rule it out here. But what about the crime passionnel? Can you rule that out? Crime and murder are far from this simple, but generally in stories and life, I believe Poirot's words to be true, with crimes with motives of money or passion being chief among those committed. Investigating criminals, working out why crimes happen, especially in mystery fiction, requires empathy and heart. Without love, it cannot be seen. ITLC embodies this idea through Risa Aioi. These criminals may be horrible people, but they are human. Whether you want to separate them from you by labeling them differently as monsters, the fact remains deep down they aren't. They are human just like us. Some human act or emotion spurred them to commit crime, and you can figure that out with your human intuition and empathy. Aioi is an odd character. You could view her as preachy, but there is something, as Sakon puts in chapter 3, saintly about her. Her well of empathy for humanity, even the ones lost to crime, is immense. She may seem stupid, but is also admirable. That level of kindness and connection to humanity, the strength necessary to overcome the perception of the crimes committed, to not necessarily separate crime from person, but to view someone as a holistic being despite what they've done. It makes Risa Aioi a richer character, and by the end of the story, ITLC ends up having a coherent message that's thought-provoking, which I can't say for most cancelled manga. ITLC approaches the mystery genre and how we view people, generally and as criminals. It looks at the labels we assign to people. This is really evident in the final 2 chapters with Aichi, whose identity gets reduced by those around him, which sparks him to commit his bombing incident. The final chapter also sees him by the end join the I Division after some time in juvenile hall. He is recognized for who he really is by Aioi, and in turn, Aichi recognizes Aioi and the Division I not as a band of weirdos who the rest of the police has swept under the rug, but a group of people who he can come to understand. ITLC reaches out and attempts to create a dialogue, not just about the idea of second chances or forgiveness for criminals, but the fundamental ability for humans to love and be empathetic towards each other. The main antagonist, should they have appeared more, I think would have made these themes even stronger and turned the story into a very meta-analysis of mystery fiction akin to something like Umineko. They already do to an extent, being a mystery writer full of apathy, much like a potential reader might try to view ITLC's mysteries objectively, seeing that it isn't really following proper rules or giving clues like a good mystery does. Kagemino has no love for others, and he does not see them as people, which directly opposes Aioi and part of ITLC's core ideas. It doesn't want you to be like him, it wants you to be empathetic, to look at the stories the manga presents and try to understand why the characters do what they do, because mystery is a very human genre, and to really understand and get the most out of the good ones, you have to approach them with some level of love. It reminds me a bit of how I like to approach axe manga. A lot of them will be ridiculed, seen as lesser, and terms like axe, axe bait, etc. are used. I perpetuate this view to an extent through these videos, which is a topic I could discuss ad nauseum, but I think each manga I cover deserves to be read and shown some level of love, to be engaged with even if it never got the time to fully become what it could have been. At the end of the day, these are still stories and works of art made by real people, and they deserve to be understood. The attempt should at least be made, just like how Aioi tries to love every criminal she encounters. As an addendum to this section, I don't think everyone will see ITLC in this way, and you could easily put holes in my arguments here, or just my reading of it generally. The characters I supposedly say you're meant to empathize with and treat as humans are all very gimmicky and silly, especially later on in the manga, as it reduces the characters to basically single gimmicks, like the side cast with Sakon, which I think sadly really hurts this potential messaging. Moving on though, this is an odd manga for Jump. The magazine doesn't usually get mystery series, and even then, this is a bizarre one on top of that. I'm not sure if ITLC could have been anything other than a short-lived cult hit, so predictably it ended quite early on. The magazine could have maybe pushed a gag manga like Me and Roboco, High School Family, or Mago-chan out of the magazine to keep it alive for a bit longer, but I think its priorities at the time weren't in keeping this quirky little gem alive, but to find new comedy series. I've also praised ITLC a lot in this video, but it is also by no means perfect. I do think its mysteries, while thematically interesting and fun, could have been a bit better structured or could have offered clues to play along with. Both a solvable mystery or some puzzles could coexist with its core ideas, which the final bomber arc showed, an arc a lot of people seem to like as well. Its sidecast, as I just mentioned, is very weak. Sakon just wasn't a very interesting character as a partner, which is funny because the villain at one point calls him a walking cliche, something I think could have led to a character redemption further on in the future if ITLC was allowed to run longer. Instead, we got a pretty bland partner who didn't really bounce off of Ai too well, and later on he just becomes a walking sack of quirks and only talks about working out or having a messy room, which isn't a good substitute for actual character growth. This is an overall problem I had with the series after the mansion arc. Characters are just introduced with or just have a new quirky little thing they have, like loving guns or the aforementioned workout obsession. It's just not necessary either when you have someone as eccentric as Ai. When everyone is quirky, it starts to dilute the novelty of its original premise, and it throws the original, almost black comedic tone out the window. The lack of a straight man as well, that Ukon and Sakon together bring, eventually harms the series as well, I think. It might have been more interesting if Sakon was the one who actually died, propelling the other brother to be more miserable to contrast Ai. Now that I've yapped plenty, we're going to go through what everyone on my Discord has to say about ITLC. Firstly, we have El Manu, who thinks the series is poorly written, and while its themes of love and empathy are interesting, it doesn't explore them that much. I think just based on what I've talked about in this video, it's easy to tell I disagree with this, but I'm also making a lot of sweeping conclusions with my reading of it as well. I do think the writing could be better though generally. What I will absolutely disagree with though is the art looking amateurish. Generally, I think ITLC's art is fine, its characters are often expressive, and it has a pretty good hold over page composition. It also snaps sometimes, especially when Ai is doing something cute or creepy, and it provides a very fun contrast with these two extremes. Sirius also points out the art as a weakness in regards to its ambitious stylistic choices, spreading it too thin. I can kind of understand what they mean by this, but I think that's a result of ITLC wanting to balance the crime and romance elements, the cuteness and creepiness, with it successfully achieving that in my opinion. The rest of Sirius's points though are really engaging. I think they nailed the series' position in Jump as a unique work, and them saying its ambition dramatically outpaces Weekly Shonen Jump's environment, as well as the author's own capabilities, is something I agree with. Maybe not so much Kazusa Inaoka's ideas, since they're almost there for me, but I'm not sure what it was trying to go for is something that would resonate with Jump's general readership. Their analysis on the cast also mirrors my own. The characters are distinct, but not well rounded, save Ai, which does make them feel very gimmicky. I also agree with the whole prologue section and setup being a bit too crammed and convoluted. It could have been a bit longer, more engaging, or just paced or reshuffled to be better. Bayland couldn't even get past the first few pages on this reread and seemed to heavily dislike the series, which some definitely do. There's a subset of people who really dislike ITLC, resulting in it having a very mixed reputation. Jinwon enjoyed the beginning sections, Ai and its general ideas as well as art, but found it fell apart after the first volume, not liking its later cases and the characters it introduced, which I completely get as the mana arc does get a bit messy and the character quirks get a bit out of hand. Witched Sarah liked the overall messaging and theming as well as Ai's encounters with Ma. Everyone just accepting Ai as bisexual was indeed refreshing. I do think they also bring up some valid critique on Ai's behaviour and stalking. Perhaps it's not conveyed enough that her actions are dangerous since it likes to play the funny angle with them, although it does plenty of times illustrate that the other characters disapprove of her and find it dangerous. I don't know how I rectify this really, since it's the core of the series to an extent and you wouldn't want to be too overbearing with telling Ai off all the time. Kinky enjoyed Ai and specific arcs like its first chapter, the Bomber and Ma, but does criticize the series heavily for the Mansion arc, citing it as the main reason why the series got cancelled. While I do like the ideas that arc presented, again, I think it could have been told in a stronger way with some better pacing. Palm is another enjoyer of Ma, citing it as their favourite arc, and by the sounds of things, nothing much stuck out to them, with them not really remembering the sidecast or being engaged with its mysteries overall. Cactus found the concept interesting but not used to its full potential, citing its deduction work as being weak as well as its sidecast. There's also a lot of praise for Ai though single-handedly saving the manga for them, with Cactus thinking if it put more commitment into either comedy or mystery, it could have ended up working better, which I agree with to an extent. A lot of people were put off by its sense of comedy and its sidecast especially, which is its weakest aspect I think. Fullmetal had one of the rarer, more positive comments, describing it as a hidden gem out of all the X-File readings we've done so far, which makes me really happy to hear. They again mainly praise Ai here, stating that she feels distinct and different from any other protagonist Jump has ever seen, which I'd agree with. Her being a fun main character and a more unique one really elevates ITLC. The idea that it would be a better fit in another magazine is one a few people brought up as well, and while I do love Jump trying weird things, I kind of agree. I think elsewhere, possibly in a magazine aimed at older audiences, ITLC might have gotten a bit more freedom and time to do what it wanted to. Post ITLC, in just 2 months after its ending, releasing on my 20th birthday, we would get the one-shot Iwaku Girl. This seemed to be about a ghost girl who in life wanted to become an idol. She then teams up with a man who can see spirits, and he helps her achieve her dream of singing on stage so she can pass on. This one looked really heartfelt, and I'd love to see it translated one day. There's a link to the raw as well as sources to a few other one-shots I've mentioned throughout this video in the description if you'd like to look at them yourself. In April of 2022, we would then see Inaoka debut their next series, Camellia Curtain, in Jump Plus. Sadly, this doesn't have an English translation, bar the first chapter, and it's extremely promising, following an all-male actor school and a more effeminate boy who's been typecast into women's roles due to his appearance and mannerisms, but he wants to defy the fate he's been dealt and play the more traditionally masculine roles within the theatre group. I think this shows tremendous growth from Inaoka's initial series, which I'd label as aggressively heteronormative at times. From what I read, it was a breath of fresh air, potentially wanting to examine ideas of gender through theatre. I'm surprised nobody has translated more though, as the art is gorgeous and generally people seem to really like manga about acting. After the end of Camellia, we would then see Your Cursed Shusaku Sensei in 2023's autumn issue of Jump Giga, being a ghost comedy about an occult novelist who doesn't believe in the occult but ends up getting cursed anyway. I've also seen them listed as doing work for Lycoris Recoil's Koshiki comic anthology, though couldn't find any confirmation on that. Finally, Inaoka would then move to Young Animal Web to serialize their currently running manga, What Are You Doing Criminal? Detective Aro Hozuki's Case Files, seeing us come full circle in a way with them continuing to make mystery detective manga. Like ITLC, this would have a bit of a gimmick with the two main characters being a mystery novel fan and a gyaru, contrasting crime and mystery with gal-based stuff. And that's case closed for ITLC and Kazusa Inaoka, a manga I got a ton out of on a second read and had a blast writing the script for. I have a feeling a lot of people won't agree on my thoughts on the series, but if I did help give you a newfound appreciation for some of ITLC's writing or quirks, that would really make me happy. As always, feel free to chime in with your thoughts on the series in the comments. I'd love to hear what everyone else has to say about the series. If you like my work here, consider subscribing for more as well, as I make videos like this all the time on other Shonen Jump cancelled manga, as well as covering weekly Shonen Jump's history year by year.
There's one thing I almost forgot. Do you have another minute?
Also, if you really enjoyed this video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It helps a ton and pushes me to make better videos. You'll also get some neat perks like voting on polls, access to a Patreon-only podcast, and at the $3 tier, you'll get a unique doodle like the following cool people: Kinocha, Jade, Kaizoku Gairu, Soraquil Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Fakeo, Yellowtail, Lay Sloggett, Chris P. Bacon, Cho Henshin, Full Metal, Unquestionable, Weepy Boy, Wurzel, Balent, Cactus, and also AB, Vako Draws, Otaku Gamer X, Deadpan, Shy Monkeys, and Jonathan Dragonet at the $1 tier. Thank you all so much for being patrons. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.